Hello, Internet. My name is Brennanarchy. Welcome back to Gregtech New Horizons. Last episode, we got this MV electrolyzer done, and we're able to use it to make silicon as well as much cheaper aluminium. In the intervening time, I've been electrolyzing a bunch of stuff, and I did complete one quest. I try not to do quests off camera, but this was a small one and I sort of did it by accident. I electrolyzed some ruby for the alumina. So we now do have a little bit of chrome dust available, which we will use eventually. The silicon that we got from electrolysis, we used to make some redstone alloy. And I was talking about how that was going to be used for cheaper LV circuits. And that is true, but I missed a crucial step. And that crucial step is that molten redstone alloy takes an MV fluid extractor. I've got a bunch of circuits that are ready to go, except for needing the molten redstone alloy. So the first thing I want to do today is make that MV fluid extractor and get all of those circuits done. And after that, we're going to start using those circuits to set up a more automated oil processing system that will give us diesel and polyethylene. The MV fluid extractor is pretty straightforward. It does take a piston and a pump, and we want to make sure to craft these separately this time because we want to make sure the quests for those pop. Obviously, we're going to be making a lot more pistons and pumps, but these are our first ones. Pump. And, oh, I forgot the gear for the piston. 2 more rods and a plate, and let me favorite that. There we go, that's the piston. Now we can make the fluid extractor. Drop that right there. Now, to make the circuits that I want to make, how many ingots do I actually have to process down here? We're doing half that, 32 crafts. So that is 16 ingots down into molten redstone alloy. All right. And we can muffle that. Oh, and this goes so fast. And now this goes into an assembly machine. It's identical to what we had before. Recipe number 5, tubes, rods, annealed copper, and redstone alloy. All right, that is going to be all of my LV chips, and I will be back with you once we've got all of the circuits crafted that go with this. And there we go. We have all of our circuits, finally. And yes, I do have a bunch of extra vacuum tubes, and we'll talk about why that is in just a few minutes. Now that we have our circuit situation dealt with, we can focus on today's project, which ultimately is polyethylene. But on the path to polyethylene, we're also going to rebuild all of our oil processing, and we're going to get into Project Red transportation to automate some of that process. The questbook chapter for Project Red Transportation actually talks about using it for desulfurization. There's a few quests down here. My setup is going to be a little bit different than what the questbook talks about, but it's pretty similar. And I do recommend following through this, or at least reading through it, if you want to get a feel for how Project Red Transportation works. But we don't have super tanks yet, so we're gonna do things just a little bit differently. But to get into this, the first thing we're gonna want to do is make a bunch of pipes. I've already prepared everything I need to make pipes, junctions, and the routed interface pipes. So we can grab all of these things and start getting everything crafted up. We want to turn these steel rods into long steel rods, and these glass blocks into glass panes. And if we look at the recipe for the item transport pipe in the assembler, you can see that using long rods and using better materials gives you better and better yields. Aluminum's not cheap enough yet for me to want to use aluminum, as much as that would be nice as far as the glass consumption goes. But we'll stick to the long steel rods and the glass panes, which gives us 16 per, and I'm making 16 glass panes. So that'll be 4 stacks of item pipes or something like that. They're really not that expensive. With our pipes crafted, we need to get them to become interface pipes, which are what's needed to work with machines and storages. There's an intermediate step, which is these junction pipes, and you use the junction pipes anywhere where you need to potentially have a T. The quest book does talk about that a little bit here, that tells you that pipes don't work well in junctions. We shouldn't need these, and the interface pipes also act like junctions, but we do have to craft some of them anyway to get to the interface pipes we need, and I'll craft some extras just so we have them in case we need them. So the junction pipes, again, we're using steel. We do have the opportunity to use more advanced recipes. And I really recommend you make these in an assembler, because making them by hand in a crafting table takes like Illimar and other stuff, and it's a mess. But look in here, we just need to make a few gears, which I do have the stuff for already, and then we can throw all this in assembler and turn a stack of our item pipes into the routed junction pipes. That's a little bit of a slower recipe, and we'll catch up when it's done. There are the junction pipes. And then lastly, we need to turn those into the interface pipes. We're going to do, I think I decided on half a stack of interface pipes. Just like the other types of pipes, you can use higher tier resources to save on other resources. In this case, trading a good circuit board for a gold plate. But a good circuit board has a gold plate in it anyway, at least with the recipe I've been using. So it's literally not worth it. If we're going to make 32 of these, that is 16 crafts, which means I do need to get a little bit of molten redstone, which I forgot to prepare. But other than that, this goes in to the assembler real easy. There are the routed pipes, or rather the routed interface pipes. So that's it for pipes, and honestly, the pipes were the easy part. Now we have chips. The quest book goes through sort of what all the different kinds of chips are, but you can really think of Project Red Transportation as having 2 systems. One of them is a push-based system, and one of them is a pull-based system. Quest book shows you the push-based system first, and that's item extractor chips and item responder chips with overflow chips. And what that does is an extractor will pull everything it can from an inventory and try to get it to another interface that has a responder chip. The other side is the pull-based system, which uses the stock keeper chips, the broadcaster chips, and the crafting chips. The stock keeper chips want to keep their connected inventory full of an item, and they'll try to get those items from broadcaster chips. If there aren't any items available from broadcaster chips, they will also try to get them from crafting chips, and then the crafting chip will potentially pull the things that it needs in order to make its craft, and so on and so forth. So that's the auto crafting system and the pull-based logistics. We're going to end up using a combination of both of these in the oil processing, and I'll talk through all the details of sort of how I have it set up once we have it built. I think it's a lot easier to talk about all of this with an example. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through getting all these different kinds of chips crafted. And once we have them done, we will go do our build and then talk about the logistics setup. All of the different types of chips start with the null logic routing chip. Again, we can craft these with different tiers of circuits. I'm going to stick to using ULV circuits, the vacuum tubes, right now, because I've decided that we do save a little bit of gold if we go to LV circuits, but it costs an LV circuit, which is already 2 vacuum tubes, plus the resistors, plus the circuit boards, and at our current tier of LV circuits, that just doesn't feel worth it to save a couple of ingots of gold. So we'll stick to the ULV ones, but probably once I have silicon processing in place and we have LV circuits that are made from silicon, we can consider reducing our gold demand there. These circuit plates are made in a forming press, which I don't have, from stone plates, which I made ahead of time, and etched low voltage wiring, which is made in a laser engraver that I also don't have. Fortunately, I do have several options for a red lens. I have some exquisite gems that I've just, gotten lucky with when mining out in the wild. So we should be able to make a Jasper, I believe, is one that I have, lens in our LV lathe. And then the other question is, do I make an LV laser engraver or do I jump right up to MV? We're gonna need the MV laser engraver for... Is IC gonna get me what I need? There we go. Logic. Integrated logic circuits. This takes an MV engraver. This is part of the process of getting silicon-based circuits, but the LV engraver is easier. So I think I'm just going to do the LV laser engraver. We're going to have to make an emitter for that. I don't think we've made an emitter yet, but they're not cheap, but they're not awful. And then for the other part, to actually put these together, we need to make a forming press. There's nothing special here. So I'll get those machines going, and we can start getting everything together for our null routing chips. There's our new machines. I also do need to make my lens. Like I said, I believe we have an exquisite... I have a Jasper, a Spinel, and a red garnet. Let's go with the Jasper. Just because. Well, because it's only silicon and oxygen, so in my brain, this is a cheaper crystal. I don't know if that's really true, but that's what my gut is telling. And that'll be our lens. Now, want to make some space up here for our new machines, the laser engraver and the forming press. I'm going to set the laser engraver to auto output to the forming press here. And then once we have our lens, we should be able to take our stone plates and our red alloy foil, and there's a lot to feed into these machines, obviously. Put the lens in and mute the sound because I'm recording a video. And that'll auto output into the forming press, which will give us our first circuit plate. There we go. The circuit plates then go into our circuit assembler, and I probably could shuffle the machines around so that it auto inputs. But the circuit plates go in with vacuum tubes and a little bit of molten soldering alloy. And we'll go ahead and make the null routing chips. We have a lot of these to craft up. We need a lot of the various types of routing chips for what we need to do. You can see there's, half a dozen different chip types that we need to make, and we need like half a stack of each of those. So my agenda has us crafting like 4 stacks of these null routing chips. I'll be watching this for several minutes, but you don't have to wait.
Many minutes later.
We've got null routing chips. 4 stacks of them, like I was saying. These all now need to be configured into all of the different chips that Project Red needs. Each of these chips has a recipe that's sort of the same shape, but with slightly different materials. So if we look at the item responder chip, we can see that it's made with orange Illumar and a copper plate, as opposed to the stock keeper chip that's made with the blue Illumar and cobalt brass. Just like the other Project Red things, there's higher tiers of these recipes that use MV circuits, HV circuits, and that saves on Illumar and on the plates, but they also do take higher tier plates. So it probably depends on the individual chips, like which tiers of which recipes might be cheapest. For now, though, we're going to do everything at the LV circuit tier. It's just easiest for me. I need like half a stack of some of these chips and only 1 or 2 of some others, and we'll talk about that again when we talk about the full build, and you can see how all the chips get used in an actual sort of setup. I'm going to go ahead and mix up the Illumar that we need. That's just glowstone and some sort of dye. I got lucky and I had my accidental slime farm, and many of the slime types drop dye. So that's making it really easy for me to use Project Red here because dyes are cheap for me. But depending on the biomes you're in and the mobs you have and the plants you have available, some colors of dye might be harder to get. It should be pretty accessible for most people, though. And there are all of our different types of chips that we're going to need alongside the item pipes, all of the Gregtech machines. These are all machines we've made before. It's actually not quite the full complement of machines. I'm going to need to salvage a couple from the existing oil processing build as we replace it with the new one. So as far as the mechanics of the new build go, that's everything. And all that's really left is the building blocks. I've been leaving this part of the base in just awful shape, right? Everything's just concrete slabs outside. And that doesn't fly with electric Gregtech machines, but also I can do better. So we're going to do an actual build. I, for whatever reason, designed this whole thing out of concrete. So we're going to need to make a bunch of concrete. Concrete is made in a fluid solidifier from wet concrete, which is just all of this stuff. And then I also need to replace my chisel. It's pretty much worn out. And I'm going to go ahead and use this recipe. This pops a quest as well to make an obsidian chisel. And once all that's done, I think we can head down to that part of the world and get this thing built. I believe at this point I have gathered all the resources for this build. We've got most of the machines, including the logistics. We've got our various building blocks. We've got tools for manipulating building blocks. We also have a crowbar because there's covers on several of these machines. And as I'm taking this apart, I'm going to need to pop those covers off. And a bunch of cells because I do want to try to save, well, maybe not the water, but the light fuel that's in here, all the light fuel that's in these needs to be pulled out because it is ultimately all going to be replaced with diesel once we have diesel manufacturing going. So I'm going to try to save what I can from these existing machines because that's a lot of oil to just void. But I'll start tearing this down. I will get some of the trees that are in my way cleared out, and we'll get this build done. There are a few little details on the building that I haven't finished yet, but I think this is good enough that we can get started. You can see I've got most of the chips here, and we're just going to start going through the different parts of the process and talking through it. The very first thing we need to do is desulfurize each of the 4 oil fractions. Each of these has a distillery making a different fraction. That's heavy oil, light oil, naphtha, and refinery gas, and then a chemical reactor to do the desulfurization. The desulfurization requires hydrogen, and we're going to do hydrogen in cell form over the logistics network. So we're going to go ahead and grab a crafting chip. And in order to set these up, I do need to have the items in my inventory, I think. I couldn't make it work with NEI. So if I go ahead and drop 2 cells into this electrolyzer, that's going to make hydrogen. And I will do the same thing here for the one that makes oxygen. There we go. We've got our hydrogen cells, so I can program this to say that 2 empty cells are crafted into 2 hydrogen cells. And I put that cell right into, or that card rather, right into the interface pipe. And you can see that this is now set up to craft hydrogen cells on demand. To drive that crafting, each of the desulfurization steps is going to need hydrogen cells. So we go ahead and program this stock keeper chip to keep a couple of cells in stock at all times. The desulfurization actually uses 2, so we want to keep 2 recipes worth of hydrogen in there, just so it's a little bit buffered. So we'll set these up to take 4 hydrogen cells, and we'll add those to each of the interfaces for our chemical reactors. Now, after these run, they're going to have empty cells that need to be gotten rid of. And we will do that with item extractor chips filtered to the empty cell. Again, 1 in each of those interfaces. And lastly, we need a place for those empty cells to go where they can be stored until they're needed to craft more hydrogen, and that's what this barrel is for. This barrel is going to have an item responder chip and an item broadcaster chip. The responder chip is going to be set to grab the empty cells. The broadcaster chip, on the other hand, is going to be set to blacklist mode with no items, and all that means is that it will broadcast everything that's in the chest. So now, if I place some empty cells into here, let's do like half a stack. It should figure out that it can send empty cells to the hydrogen, and then those will start to be dispatched to the various desulfurization steps. Nice and easy. And the last thing we want is an item terminator chip. This tells any excess crafts where to go. So, for example, this makes 2 hydrogen at a time. If for some reason we only had a request for 1 hydrogen, that extra hydrogen cell has to go somewhere, and that will be to this chest. And again, I'm going to set this as blacklist with nothing in it, and what that says is any extra crafts in the whole network come into this barrel. So that is desulfurization that will be working across all 4 oil fractions. We'll go ahead and run this one. I haven't actually turned on the oil yet. This tank here needs a pump cover, so it's not going to really run, but in theory we could turn it on. I don't want to because I don't want to use up all of the fuel that's in these generators. These are all just filled up with the leftover light fuel from the old system. And I want to make sure that we're set up to make diesel and have all the requests for diesel up and running before we have everything start turning on like full speed. Once the fractions are desulfurized, and apparently I did not set up the auto output on this one, there's 2 things that need to happen. I messed up programming these item extractor chips. I forgot about the hydrogen sulfide. So let's pull each of these item extractors out, and we'll add the hydrogen sulfide to the things that we want to be extracted. And I'll just grab this hydrogen sulfide cell and filter, because it's not an empty cell at that step. It is... No, it's one of each, right? It's a hydrogen sulfide cell and an empty cell. So that'll go into each of those interfaces now. And then making the sulfuric acid, here at the first step of that, at the chemical reactor, this just gets an item responder chip that is programmed for the hydrogen sulfide. And now any hydrogen sulfide in the network will get pushed into here. And of course, we need an extractor chip to get out any empty cells. We're going to have extractor chips for empty cells all over the place. So that's desulfurization of all the fractions, as well as processing the hydrogen sulfide byproduct. Each of these fractions is going to end up with crafting cards in them, and we've got light fuel, so I can do the light fuel one, right? We're going to make a crafting card here that says you can turn one empty cell into one light fuel at this low voltage tank. And we're going to have to do that for each of the other fractions. I'll do that off camera. So far, this is everything that we had set up before with extra steps. The other things that we need is we need to be able to make ethylene, and that needs to happen at this setup, which I just realized my plumbing is going to be a little funky here, but I'll make it work. This chemical reactor needs a steam pipe hooked up to it, and that will steam crack the refinery gas, and then the distillery will convert that down to ethylene, which will end up in this tank. This tank will have a crafting card to put ethylene into cells, and then this tank will have a requester card to stay stocked with an ethylene cell. I could probably just do this with a pipe because they're right next to each other instead of going like distillery to tank to cell to tank to chemical reactor, but I want to have ethylene cells available for other chemistry. So we're doing it in a little bit of a roundabout way, and that's fine. And then this will combine with oxygen and end up in here as our polyethylene. So pretty much for me now, it's just a matter of setting up all of the crafting cards and getting all of these individual steps actually up and running. We've gotten our first refinery gas, which means we can finally set up the polyethylene chain. The first thing I'm going to do is I need to set this up exactly the same as the light fuel, where we have a crafting chip from an empty cell into a refinery gas cell. And that'll go here. And then where we're processing refinery gas into ethylene, which is this step, you can see we have steam, and we want this to run all the time, passively, right? Making ethylene. So we're going to do this one with a stock keeper chip. And we're going to say that we want it to stay stocked with a couple of refinery gas cells. Throw that here. And that should dispatch a craft. And the refinery gas cells should be sent over here. There we go. And I'll throw this one in too. Of course, we also need to take out the empty cells, just like in every craft. So we'll put that in here as well. That pushes the refinery gas into this distillery, which will hopefully, after this craft here, have enough to turn on and make ethylene for me. And that will push the ethylene into this tank. And again, we will have to do the process of getting a cell, although we need a few more crafts before I can fill up that fluid cell. This also makes this tiny pile of carbon dust. We will take care of that with an extractor. And for now, it'll just go into the barrel at the end where I can forget about it until the whole system backs up on carbon dust, at which point I will come up with a more permanent solution. And then the last step here is this ultra low voltage tank needs to stock ethylene cells and, of course, get rid of empty cells. This only needs to stock one cell. Remember that it also, is a buffer unto itself. And then this needs a pump, feeds into this chemical reactor. And this chemical reactor needs to be set to request oxygen cells. And we've got our first little bit of polyethylene here. I'm going to have to grab cells of lots of these things to complete steps of the quest book and things like that, which I will do on my own time. But that is huge for us. Polyethylene is a major, major milestone. So the last thing we need to do is set up this system to be able to fuel itself. Right now, I kind of have to manually move light fuel around to all of these generators. And that means we got to make up the MV mixer that I forgot about and an MV generator to go with it. And then that is going to be set up to autocraft diesel, and I'll show that configuration. And then all of these generators get to have stock cards and extractor cards to keep them stocked with diesel cells. All right, here's our mixer, and hopefully we've got enough things here that we can, So the mixer recipe to make a diesel cell, not a biodiesel cell, a regular diesel cell. You can see that this is 5 light fuel cells and 1 heavy fuel cell. So if we go ahead and grab those, 5 and 1 here. And I do still actually need to program the heavy fuel extractor, so we'll do that. Then I can set the mixer recipe here to be 5 light fuel, 1 heavy fuel into diesel. But first we actually have to run the recipe at least once. And let me grab a little bit more light fuel just to start the generator. There we go. Now we have our output of that, which is 6 diesel. And we can program that. And I think at this point, we just have to program all of our generators, which is like 16 generators in here, I think. All of them are going to be set up the same, though. They want to stock a single diesel cell. And they will all be set to extract empty cells. And if we go ahead and set that up here first, this should craft all of the light fuel cells and heavy fuel cells, start the mixer. That diesel comes into here, and then the excess comes over here. Now we just have to program all of our generators this way. So that is new oil processing. We've got sulfuric acid happening automatically. We've got all 4 oil fractions being desulfurized. We've got polyethylene, and we've got diesel fuel ready to run everything. Hopefully I wasn't too all over the place with how all of the different, requester cards and everything work to keep this system running. I know there's a lot of moving pieces, but if you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will try to explain myself better. So thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, be sure to leave a like and do consider subscribing, and I will see you next time. What are you doing in there?